Live doing a little bit of sort of Friday afternoon Lyme education. This is Lyme Disease Awareness Month. And one of the things I say every May that comes around is, hey, you know what? I'm going to be doing daily live information to everybody and just really get the word out. So, um, you always get so busy helping people in the office that you don't always spend the time to get it done. And this year, we're off to a little bit of a late start because we've been planning the Healing from Lyme Disease Summit, which is going to be live next week, May 9th through the 16th, which will be super duper cool. But in the meantime, we've got Lyme Awareness Month, and I really have a whole list of different things I want to talk about. So every day I'm going to be sharing some content where we're really just talking about the things that people want to know about Lyme disease. We'll spend a little time doing this, and then certainly invite you to join us at the Lyme Summit, because that's where we really can take a super deep dive. We've got over 50 experts who are coming in to talk about everything from prevention of Lyme disease and other tick bites in general. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And then, everything from acute Lyme treatment through the most sensitive, chronic, persistent symptoms. So certainly join us for that. But today I really wanted to just spend a minute and talk about what is Lyme disease and really how is it transmitted, because this is a topic that comes up so frequently in our practice, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. So, Lyme disease is this bacterial infection caused by Borrelia burgdorferi, at least in the United States. And this is the bacteria is a spiral organism, a spirochete. That's what we call it. And, there are other species of Borrelia in Europe that can transmit infection or cause infection and lead to what we call Lyme disease. And we're also learning there's some emerging other Borrelia species in the United States that can do the same. So one of the things I think is important to understand is that this comes we're talking about transmission through the bite from an infected Ixodes scapularis or Ixodes pacificus tick in the United States. There are really no other highly documented or well-known ways to get Lyme disease. We do know that some of the transmission could be from mom to unborn baby. Anything else that you hear about out there is a possibility, but is definitely not something that's been confirmed by science. The numbers of people with Lyme these days are so great that it is possible there are other modes of transmission, but we're just not clear on what those might be. So let's focus on this, because this Ixodes tick that's sharing Lyme disease with different people, the adult females can transmit, as well as the nymph tick. And the adult females are responsible for about 5% of all Lyme transmission. They're a little bit larger. They have this yellow, orangish on their backside, and so pretty easy to find. But they are, even of all the regular, the other ticks out there, they're still much smaller. But 95% of Lyme comes from the bite of an infected nymph deer tick. And the issue that comes up with that is they're the size of about a poppy seed. So we're talking about this very, very small poppy seed type thing that's so easy to miss. And so it's kind of like a no-see-em. So that's kind of, I think, one of the reasons why we miss them frequently. And now the other thing is, we know that they're primarily found in a wooded and grassy area, but the edge is the important piece. So these bugs are hanging out, these ticks are hanging out the same places chipmunks and mice are hanging out. So the edge of a garden, if you have a nice grassy lawn butting up to the woods, it's 10 feet into the woods and 10 feet out are the primary places, along the side of trails. So a lot of the places that we go to recreate. But Lyme is considered paradomestic, meaning that you actually are going to see about 75% of Lyme is transmitted in your yard or your neighbor's yard, your kid's friend's yard. So these are the areas we have to learn to watch the most. And Dr. Alexis Chesney joins us and Dr. Darren Engels for an interview in our summit where they dive into that even deeper. But, it's important to understand that Lyme is primarily in the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic states, also the upper Midwest. But with global climate change, we are certainly seeing these areas change, right? We're seeing that the ticks are, when I went to the University of Vermont for my undergraduate studies, we never saw ticks up there. Now in northern Vermont, you're seeing ticks quite a bit. So the range of the ticks are spreading. So Lyme is spreading into many places where it may not have been seen as frequently in the past or ever. The other thing is we have migrating birds and ticks fall off of them. So the take-home message is you're able to be exposed to Lyme in a lot of places in the country. The big heavy hitters are sort of more on the West Coast, and then there's other areas that I mentioned, the upper Midwest, the Northeast, and the Mid-Atlantic states, but you're really not safe anywhere. And people travel, right? People go on vacation in places where ticks are. So it's a thing to be aware of. The other thing is that Lyme is carried by those Ixodes ticks. So the deer tick or the black-legged tick in the United States. But the other thing is those ticks also carry other infections like anaplasmosis, babesiosis, Borrelia miyamotoi, and a ton of viruses. So these are really important things to be considering. And yet I see a comment that we're in a hot spot in California. Yeah, it's interesting, like, the Southwest and then the far west of the country are certainly becoming bigger hotbeds these days than they ever were before. And so a lot of the top areas in the country for Lyme disease are actually emerging. So be careful. And especially, we do know that California is one of those big places. So other things to think about is, Lyme disease, we'll later on in the month, we'll get into specific symptoms and really dive in. But one of the things that happens that we should really be aware about in May, June, going into the summer is as these ticks become more and more active, and I want to say as the weather gets warmer, but I mean, the East Coast didn't have much of a winter this year. So they're out every month of the year, but more so as it gets warmer. These symptoms are variable between different people. And the thing you have to think about is the stage of the disease. So in early disease, most people are going to get something like a flu-like illness, fever, chills, headache, fatigue, muscle and joint aches. These are kind of what we classically call summer flu. Problem is, it can happen in any month of the year. And so then between the flus over the winter, the pandemic and everything, all these other viruses, this gets missed frequently, right? And a lot of people are looking for that erythema migrans or bullseye type rash. The issue with the rash is, and I'll later on in the month, I'm going to show you some pictures of these. I think it's really important. But the gist is, in the literature, the medical literature, 40 to 60% of the time, people who are ultimately diagnosed with Lyme disease are actually people who get this erythema migrans or EM rash. And then we all go, oh, well, that's the bullseye rash. Well, the problem is the bullseye rash is only about 30% of all true EM rashes. So most of the time we're getting somebody with like a red or a purple blotch. It might be a ring with a clear center, but not a true bullseye. You might have multiple different lesions in different areas, different rashes. And basically, the biggest problem is sometimes it looks like a bruise. So, just be aware that when you're getting these weird rashes you don't expect, definitely have them checked out, because in those early stages, maybe we had that kind of flu-like illness that then passes. But if we're not diagnosed and treated properly, we can get to late stage disease where we're starting to see more not only just joint pain, but joint swelling, neurologic symptoms. We get numbness, tingling. You could potentially get a Bell's palsy or heart block. And the biggest problem for me, having, specialized in this for nearly 15 years now, is that so many people get missed because it is just kind of like this nondescript flu-like thing that then calms down until 6 or 8 months later where you get really bad symptoms. So as we round out today with our introduction to what we'll be doing over the month, I just wanted to share that one of the best things to do is to prevent getting, bitten by the tick. So some of this is landscape management. I can go ahead and link to some of the articles I have on this, but definitely check out the Healing from Lyme Summit and specifically Dr. Chesney's conversation with Dr. Engels, because they do talk about this. One of the things to think about is, I don't always like to go outside and I've got my long sleeve on now because it's a little chillier today, but I don't always like to go outside like that. So one of the things I found, and I don't always like wearing long pants and white pants and tucking them into my socks. That can be helpful. But one of the things you can do is get some of those exercise pants, those underwear that are sort of like, I started out with some Under Armour, and now I've got all kinds of different kinds that I found a little more comfortable. But just ones that seal off, have an occlusion at the end where your leg comes out. And same with your arms. You can wear more of that skin tight workout stuff. Maybe put those on underneath or just use them as the clothing, because that'll seal the tick from getting into the places it wants to be. Warm, damp, dark places. So think the groin, think the armpits, think the inside of the ears, and then in the hair, right? So if we can close off the armpits and we can close off the groin, it's not that you're not going to get bit on your arm or your leg, but you're going to be able to find them, and then when you come home, you spend a lot of time focused on your ears and your hair. A lot of people also will talk about using DEET and things of that nature. That's not one of the things that I like, because I've sprayed DEET on an old school plastic Band-Aid, and then I can actually rub my finger down and you can see all of it melt away. So I prefer some of the natural stuff. If you're in a super, super high level risk area, maybe using some DEET with something more natural, like one of the cedar-based sprays. But one of the tricks I found is permethrin, and you can get Sawyer's permethrin and spray it. And the trick with this is, when it's wet, you don't want to be touching it or licking it. We can actually put it on our skin, so it's not super toxic to us, but we don't want to be spreading it, and you certainly don't want to put it in your eyes. But the other part is, don't mess around with permethrin in an area where you could be near like a stream or water, because it's very toxic to aquatic plants. And so one of the things I'd recommend that people do is just, you spray it in your garage or right outside, you hang it dry overnight. And this stuff, depending upon whether you do it yourself or you use a company like Insect Shield, where you can send them a whole bag full, and whatever you can put in their bag, they'll do for you for a certain price. If you do it at home, you're probably getting 8 or 9 washes before you have to redo it. If you have it professionally done, like by Insect Shield, probably closer to 60 or 70 washes before you have to reapply. But once this stuff is dry, it's non-toxic, and this stuff will kill ticks on contact and will help minimize your exposure. And that's, I think, a really, really important thing. So, check into some of those things. We'll be talking about some of the landscape management stuff you can do and some of the other tricks. But those are some of the most important things. So after you do that, you're trying to, and the other part about the permethrin, you can spray the shoes you use outside and your socks. And there's one study that showed something like 70% reduction in the number of ticks on a person who walked through a tick-infested area if all they did was put permethrin on their shoes and socks. So this is so easy, low-hanging fruit. Shoes and socks, spray them. Wear the ones when you go outside, just wear the same ones over and over and over, because this way it's so easy. If you have 70% reduction in your risk of getting a tick bite because you reduced 70% of the ticks that are on you, man, that's like super low-hanging fruit. And that way you don't even have to worry about the rest of you. Now, I still want to prevent the other 30%, if I can, but man, that's just one simple thing that's such a high yield thing to do. So definitely do that. And then when you get home, obviously tick checks, because if you do the tick check, the biggest problem with infections and transmission of Lyme is that everybody says, oh, it's got to be over 36 hours on you, right? Biting you. I'm like, first of all, that's baloney. But where that comes from is, in the first day to day and a half, that there is known transmission, and it can be in as less than 8 hours. We've got confirmation of all of this, but the key is to understand that that there's kind of like an exponential curve, right? So it starts out low, and then by the time you get to day 2, 3, 4, it goes higher and higher. So yes, the risk of getting, if the tick that bit you is infected, of having transmission is much higher in day 3 and 4, because the nymph feeds for about 4 days and the adult feeds for about 5. But the important part about understanding that is that when we do that the longer it's on you, yes, the more likely you are to get infected, but any time on you is not good. So do the tick check, remove it early. And, that's a brief overview kind of some of the basic things with Lyme, some of the ways to prevent transmission. We are going to dive so much more deeply into this, but I just wanted to kind of get out there and say hi, wish everybody a happy May. It's also Lyme Awareness Month, and also invite you to join our free Lyme Summit May 9 through 16. Links are in all our descriptions, and hope to see you there. Any questions or topics that you want to see covered for this Lyme Awareness Month, please drop them in the comments. We'll be sure to get to them. And until next time, I hope everyone listening has an amazing weekend, and can't wait to see you next time. Dr. Tom out.